Hello and welcome. My name is Avery. Welcome to my mid-year freakout tag. That means it's July 2026 already, which is a concern to me. It's concerning that the year is halfway over, but that's what we've got the mid-year freakout tag for, is to celebrate the first half of the year. I love the mid-year freakout tag. I think it's really fun. I think it's poorly named because the questions aren't very freaky. I think the questions should be freakier, frankly, but we can let it slide. We're not going to shame. I'm not freaking out because I don't set goals for myself, really. I just read for fun and I just try and have a good time. So I don't have to freak out about whether or not I'm achieving my goals because I'm not setting goals. So I've had a wonderful reading year so far. I'm really hoping to keep the good times rolling in the second half of the year, and I have some books planned that I think will keep the good times rolling for sure. I have read some excellent books and some mid books, but no like truly bad books. I wish I could rant about a terrible book, but I haven't dabbled with a bad book so far this year, especially because if I am like 10 pages into a book and I know that it's not for me, I just put it down. If it weren't for these really good books that I've been reading, I fear my grip on reality would be slipping. And so I have good books to thank for keeping me maybe slightly sane in this year. I want to give you some quick stats real quick about what books I have read so far. So my only goal, I did set like sort of a goal, but not like a quantifiable goal. And that was that I wanted to just read more diversely. I've read a lot of books last year, a lot of books from the US and from England. I'm always trying to read books from people from not those countries as much as possible. So I try to read diversely. And this year so far, let me look at my stats. Right now, I think I'm sitting at 28 books read, which is good. It's a great start to the year. At least at the time of noting down my stats, only 8 of the books that I had read this year were from US authors. So that's a win, definitely a win. And several of those were authors from the US, but not necessarily just like white people from the US, which is always my goal if trying to read diversely. It's not just white Americans. Which you may be able to guess is a category I fall under, shamefully and regrettably. Additionally, I have read books by authors from 14 different countries. And I also read 8 books that were originally written in a language other than English, translated books. 14 countries, 8 languages, 28 books. I mean, that's a pretty good start to the year. And I'm hoping to go even further as the year progresses, hopefully. Honestly, if I can just keep up reading this many really good books, this like ratio of good books to mid books in the second half of the year, I think I would be perfectly happy. But I also would like to read from more countries and more languages if possible. So without further ado, let's get into the tag. I'm going to start with the big question number 1. It's kind of, I feel like almost the most exciting question. So we're going to get out of the way early and then you can listen to all the other questions later in the video because you're sticking around, I'm sure, after the most exciting question. The first question is, what is the best book you've read in 2026 so far? I'm going to do something that I'm probably going to do a lot in this video, and that is bending the rules. And I'm going to choose 2 books, probably for most of these questions, because it's you're my captive audience, and I'm going to do as I please. And in this case, I'm going to do sort of 2 different books to answer this question in 2 different ways, because I always feel like I distinguish between a favorite book and a best book that I read in the year, because to me, a favorite book is sort of like an emotional experience more so than just a qualitative experience. If you can hear my dog walking around, don't worry about him. He likes to pace and his little claws go clack, clack, clack. Anyways, point is I will be differentiating between a favorite and a best book that I read. And I will kind of get into more of what is a favorite versus a best for me later when I get to the best. No, when I get to the favorite. But first I'm going to tell you about the best book I have read so far this year, which for me, I think I'm going to go with Moby Dick by Herman Melville. So this is a little tale about, let's just call him Ishmael. He hops on a boat called the Pequod, and he ends up in this zany journey to catch a giant white whale named Moby Dick. I was trying to do a bit where I explained the plot of Moby Dick to you, even though I'm sure you know about Moby Dick. But I don't know if that's that funny of a bit. Anyways, obviously this is a famous classic. So I don't need to tell you too much about it, I don't think. It is good. It's really good. Herman Melville is an excellent writer. He is super talented. I obviously had a lot of thoughts while reading it. It's a rich text with a lot of cultural significance to this day, despite the fact that it is 100 years old. So there's that. My only problems with it are that I got pretty bored in the middle. And I think that's a pretty universal experience. I mean, not universal. I'm sure there are people who never get bored. But it bogs down in the middle a lot. It gets really dense with sort of becoming a whale textbook, a whaling textbook. There's pretty extensive details about whaling and catching whales and killing whales. A lot of talking about killing whales, and it's like pretty brutal and intense. And it's good the whole time. It's good. It's well written. I can totally understand why it's famous. I can totally understand the importance, and I did like it. I especially loved the first 150 pages. I loved, and I was reading those I was giggling. I was kicking my feet in the air and going this is going to be the greatest book I've ever read. This will be a number one all-time favorite. And then it really shifts tone after that in a way that I understand thematically, but that doesn't mean I had to enjoy it, and I didn't. But being said, it's beautifully written. It's incredibly well written. It's, for the time, very well researched, though I am certain there's a lot of whale facts in here that are no longer accurate. But I think as just sort of a cultural, contextual piece of information from this time, it's an incredible resource, and it is beautifully written. And the beginning, the first bit, the sort of homoeroticism is incredible and so unexpected for me, and I had an amazing time with that. So, Complicated Feelings, that's why it's the best book I've read so far this year, because it is an absolute behemoth of a English language achievement. But that doesn't mean that I had fun necessarily the whole time reading it. That's my Moby Dick review, the best book I've read so far this year. So that sort of transitions me well into my point about the best versus my favorite book of the year. I can acknowledge Moby Dick is an incredible literary achievement, straight up. But despite the fact that it's really well written, there were definitely times in the middle where I was straight up not enjoying myself and not having a great time. So for me, I think a book to become an all-time favorite of mine, it needs to both have that literary merit, but also it needs to speak to me specifically and my soul. It needs to speak to my soul, and it needs to come to me at just the right place and just the right time. So I feel like there's a time for me in my future. I can see it in my future, a time where Moby Dick would check all the boxes for me to be a favorite, but it didn't this year. But a book that did for me was Greek Lessons by Hong Kong. She is a South Korean author who recently, I believe in 2024, she won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And her arguably most famous book is The Vegetarian, which I had read, I think in 2023 or early 2024, before she had won the Nobel Prize. I read The Vegetarian and I liked it, but I didn't love it. And to me, now, looking back on it, that to me means I need to go revisit it, because I was not exactly familiar with sort of South Korean writing. So I didn't know what to expect going into it, and I wasn't prepared mentally. So, with all that said, I saw this at a local bookstore recently, and I was like, I'm ready to give her another try, especially now that she's won the Nobel Prize. I'm ready for her, for sure. And I picked up Greek Lessons. And as you can see by the fact that it's in this point in the video, I loved it. I thought this book was so good. I think there was like something in the air this week that I was just picking up really excellent books. Maybe I was just like in the mind frame to be moved. Do you ever have that? So you'll see, compared to Moby Dick, especially, this is super quick, a super short read. It's under 200 pages, 172 pages, and it is about a woman who loses her words. And I'm not going to be more specific than that. Honestly, that's like all you need to know about the plot. As with a lot of books that I love, the plot is thin. There's not much plot, but it's still really good. I think that the ideas and thoughts in this book are so rich. It's so incredibly rich that I think I felt, as I was reading it, I felt like my world and my understanding of the world around me was expanding. Like I could feel that happening as I was reading this book. And I can't properly communicate to you what that means because I'm not Hong Kong and I don't have a Nobel Prize for literature. So if you want to know what that means, you have to read this book yourself. And that's just how it is. And I think especially coming off of Moby Dick, I read like not that long after finishing Moby Dick, I was so blown away by her ability to convey such complex ideas in so few words, especially after Moby Dick, which does like the exact opposite, I think. I'm very impressed with her ability to convey so much with so little, which I think is a little bit of like a language thing. I don't speak Korean, but based on the Korean and Japanese books that I've read, it feels like, I don't know if it's cultural or linguistic, but both Korean and Japanese books that I've read, they convey so much with so little. Let me see if I can find maybe a couple quotes that I want to read from here. Before I read these quotes, I remembered one other thing that I want to mention about the plot of the book. It is written from two characters' perspectives. So there's the woman who's losing her words, who decides to take Greek lessons. And the other primary character is a man who loses and is losing his vision. So there's sort of this comparison about the way we move through the world and sort of the sensory deprivation of not being able to see versus not being able to speak, and the very interesting way that combines when these two people try to interact with each other. Anyways, it's just fascinating. It's just fascinating, okay? Just trust me. She greeted people, expressed thanks and apologized, all with her eyes rather than words. To her, there was no touch as instantaneous and intuitive as the gaze. It was close to being the only way of touching without touch. Language, by comparison, is an infinitely more physical way to touch. It moves lungs and throat and tongue and lips. It vibrates the air as it wings its way to the listener. And this is literally like 2 pages later, this next quote I'm going to read. Her body bears witness to the fact of her long-term muteness. It appears firmer or heavier than it really is. Her footsteps, the movements of her hands and arms, the long rounded contours of her face and shoulders, all demarcate clear, strong perimeters. Nothing seeps out, and nothing seeps in past these limits. There's just like something palpable about this book, and I don't know how else to explain it. And because it's, for me, a favorite book is such an emotional thing, you probably won't get it unless you also feel this way about this book. So let me just read one more. Let me give a little bit of context. This is one of the like Greek lessons. So they're talking about a certain word in Greek. It was possible for all 3 translations to be correct, because beauty, difficulty, and nobleness were, for the ancient Greeks, concepts not yet split apart. That there had once been a word that encapsulated both beauty and the sacred, without their having yet fallen away from each other, just as color and clarity had formed one body within another word. The truth of this had never before been brought home to me with such vibrant intensity. If you get it, you get it, and if you don't, you don't, and I think that's okay. That's Greek Lessons by Hong Kong. If I've convinced you to read it, I hope you like it as much as I do. Maybe you won't, and that's okay. Let's move on. It's been way too long already, and I've only talked about 2 books, and that's only 1 question. So, number 2, what has been your favorite sequel for the first half of the year? This one's a little interesting for me because I don't read a lot of series. I read very few series. And I've read 2 books so far that are sequels. So I'll just tell you about both of them since I love to bend the rules. The first sequel I read was Dune Messiah. I listened to it on audiobook. So I picked this up because I read Dune, I feel like it was 2020. I feel like it was a COVID moment for me. I read the first Dune book a long time ago, and I had absolutely no inclination whatsoever to pick up the sequels. So that kind of tells you how I felt about it. But then I saw the trailer for Dune Part 3. It looks so good, okay? It looks so good. And I went feral. I watched the trailer like 7 times. There's something in that trailer. There's something in there, and I think it's crack cocaine. So I was like, naturally, because the movie doesn't come out till December, I've got to read this book. I've got to. And I did. I flew through it. I flew through Dune Messiah. I listened to it so quick. It's not very long. I just don't like the way Frank Herbert writes. I know. I feel mean for even saying it. Let me do compliment sandwich. Bread 1. I think that the ideas and the concepts explored in these books are super interesting, and they're like very philosophical and thoughtful. And I think that is neat. So now the veggies and cheese of my sandwich is I don't understand why he writes the way he writes. I feel like, especially in Dune Messiah, so the beginning is like setting up this conspiracy, basically. And there's like a few major players in this conspiracy. There's Princess Irulan, who's played by Florence Pugh in the movies, and Scytale, who I believe is played by Robert Pattinson in the new movie that's coming out. They're like major players in this conspiracy that's developing, and it's the whole first like few chapters. And it's super interesting, and it had me so locked in and so excited for this book. And then there's just a point where it just sort of switches over to Paul's perspective primarily. That's Timothée Chalamet. If you're only a movie head, it switches over to Paul's perspective and then just stays there, and you never hear from Princess Irulan again until literally the very end of the last chapter, and you don't even hear from her. She's just sort of like mentioned. And like there's hints that she might be up to something in the background, and I don't understand it. I don't understand this choice. I think it's weird. And I think it makes the book not very fun to read. And that's my personal opinion. Oh wait, I have to give one more. I have to give a compliment sandwich. So my second piece of bread is that I think the world building is really cool. I really like the world building. And if it was like maybe either just more world building, I just want more. I think I just want more. I think I want him to just have, like, he leaves a lot unsaid. And I think for me, I would like him to just go ahead and say a little bit more. And it's a little late for that. It's a little late to make that request. So, Dune Messiah, I was neutral. And then I listened to probably 95% of the third book, Children of Dune, and then my library hold I ran out of time on my library hold, and I just was like, okay. So I feel bad. I feel bad. So that's the first sequel I read this year, and yeah, it's good, just maybe not for me. Especially, and also I would say I wouldn't recommend the audiobook because it's so philosophical and thoughtful, and like when you're reading or listening to an audiobook, you don't have the chance to like think about and make connections in the way that you do when you're reading, at least for me. Dune Messiah is okay. And the only other sequel I read this year so far was Golden Fool by Robin Hobb. This is the second book in the third trilogy of The Realm of the Elderlings. So yeah, it's a sequel, all right. It's a sequel. It's a sequel squared. So obviously I like this series because this is the 8th book in the series that I've read. So obviously I'm a fan. This is honestly probably one of my least favorites so far. It's a bummer. I didn't love it. I think because this is the 8th book, the first book starts like really small, and then slowly each book after that expands your understanding of the world. But then this book, you're 8 books in, and this book to me felt like suffocating. You're stuck in the same setting the whole time. You're expanding your understanding of the world, but it's through like hearing about it from other people, and it's never through Fitz actually really getting to take part in anything. And it makes sense because of how the first book in this trilogy ended, which I can't tell you, I literally can't talk about anything because it's the 8th book in a series, so everything is spoilers. But it makes sense a little bit. I can see why it would be this way, but that doesn't mean I had to like reading it. But with all that being said, this book had a ton of setup for the next book, and the setting up is really exciting to me. I'm very, very excited to see where the next book in this trilogy is going. So this was definitely just a lull in an otherwise excellent trilogy for me, I think, because the first book in this trilogy I loved, and it's later on this list, and I will get to it. So I think this was a bit of a lull. It kind of fell into the second book in a trilogy slump for me, which is a bummer. So all that is to say, I didn't read a sequel so far this year that I loved. Okay, that was sequels that I've read so far this year that I loved. Kind of a disingenuous answer, I guess, but whatever. I'm breaking the rules. The next question is there a new release that you haven't read yet this year that you want to? And I gotta be honest, it might be obvious from the pile of books behind me, but I'm not like I don't keep up with the new releases very well. But what I do keep up with is the Booker Prize, the International Booker Prize, and the Women's Prize for Fiction. I keep my eye on those. I am intrigued by the Taiwan Travelogue by... Wow, I don't have the author's name written down anywhere. I will put it on screen because I'm going to butcher the pronunciation anyways, and I can't look it up right now because you're on my phone. But I'm intrigued by this. I believe it just won the International Booker Prize. And I would love to read a book from Taiwan, especially if I can get any insight into sort of the political situation. I would be very intrigued. So that's my answer. Oh, and another one that I will add is The Correspondent by Virginia Evans, I believe is her name. It just won the Women's Prize for Fiction, and my mom read it earlier this year and she really loved it. So shout out to Mom. We have it on audiobook and I will definitely be checking that out. Okay, the next question is a new release for the second half of the year that you're excited for. And when I was planning out what books I was going to talk about in this video, I put down Land by Maggie O'Farrell, and then I figured out that it has already come out. So that shows you how much I'm paying attention to new releases. Maggie O'Farrell was the writer of Hamnet. If you haven't read or seen the new movie, genuinely, I have never watched a movie before and cried so hard that I felt sick afterwards. But I did with Hamnet. So just so you know, that's why I want to read Land, because if she can do that to me, then I would love to see what else she's capable of doing to me. Anyways, but that doesn't answer the question because it already came out. It came out in June. And truly, truly, the only new release on this planet that I'm keeping my eye out for is Alecto the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, the third book in the Locked Tomb trilogy. And until I get news about that book, I simply will not be excited for any new release. Like, this is the section where I'd put Alecto the Ninth news if I had any. Please, I need to know what happens. What is your biggest disappointment this year? This one's hard because I've had a really good reading year, and there's a couple books I've picked up that I haven't been interested in and I've just put down. So I don't feel disappointed. I just moved on immediately. I have decided, though, I'm going to talk about Same Bed, Different Dreams by Ed Park for this. And this one's a little bit on me because I just picked this up completely randomly. I sort of read the back blurb, but you read the back blurb of this book and you're like, I really like the cover. I wanted to read a book that I had never heard anything about and just see what the vibe was. So I picked this up and I like the cover. Yeah, I think it's just a copy that I like. It's kind of a floppy paperback. Then you can win me over with a floppy paperback really easily, just so you know. This book it's 3 stories in one. There's sort of one that, especially at the beginning, you're like, I don't know how this is connected. And then the other 2 are very clearly connected. There's a sort of modern New York man, and he is reading a book called Same Bed, Different Dreams. And then you're also reading Same Bed, Different Dreams. And it's sort of there's chapters, and each chapter is one of those 3 stories. So there was, for a period of time in the 50s, way off, in 1919, there was something known as the Korean Provisional Government that was established to protest Japanese occupation in Korea. And this is sort of at the beginning of the split into North and South Korea, is when the Same Bed, Different Dreams book takes place. And in real life, the Korean Provisional Government, it seems like, as far as I understand it, they didn't do a whole lot and sort of dissolved. It says here it was after World War II, the KPG dissolved. So, 1919 to like 1945, the KPG was in place and then it dissolved. But this book sort of reimagines what if the KPG was still very much so alive and well, and there's like a secret sort of underground organization, and they're kind of spreading their news secretly. And the problem for me is this: I'm not that familiar with Korean history. I have sort of a general idea, and this is really detailed, but it's also to some extent fictional. And I don't know what's fictional and what's real. And that's not this book's fault. That's my fault. But it does make it a little bit difficult to read. That's one of my problems with this book, and which again is a me problem. It's not an Ed Park problem. And the other problem is the beginning was really fun. It was a really good, like, I was kind of giggling. I was laughing. It's very like Moby Dick. I was giggling, laughing, kicking my feet. And then a lot of the sort of middle parts about the KPG are really dry comparatively, which is, it's sort of like the problem you have with a book that has like multiple POVs. It's just like, if one part isn't as interesting to you as the others, it makes it not as fun to read. And the really like sort of dry historical KPG parts were the bulk of the book, and it got a little bit old for me. But I was also trying to really keep up because I'm trying to learn a little bit about Korean history. So by no means was it bad. I thought it was a good book, and it was interesting and very, very unique. If you're interested in that at all, I still would highly recommend Same Bed, Different Dreams. Just know you're in for kind of a wild ride. I feel like I've been like kind of negative so far. I don't want to be. I'm trying to be positive. I'm trying to have a good time here. Luckily, this next question I think is one I can be very positive about, and it is, what is your biggest surprise so far? And I have, believe it or not, 2 books that I want to talk about. I want to give big old shout out to Nervous Conditions by Tsitsi Dangarembga. I googled how to pronounce that, and that was what Google said, so if that's wrong, I'm sorry. This book is extra special because, so I'm going to do a little quick story time, so quick. I got an Instagram reel, someone's just suggesting more diverse classics that aren't Moby Dick and East of Eden, basically. And they suggested this book, and I thought it sounded great, and I tried to get it from my library, and they just didn't have it, which was a bummer. And so then I went and looked around my like used bookstores. I try to only buy used books or from like local bookstores, and they didn't have it. And I was like, I guess like I'll just wait for it to sort of fall into my lap. And it did. As you can see, my town held a little local book swap. You just bring in books you don't want anymore and just swap with other people. And I saw this there, and it was really exciting for me because, like, what do you mean this was there if I couldn't find it anywhere else, but it was at my local book swap? But also, where else are you going to find the random ass book that you've been looking for? Of course, it's your book swap. This book is excellent. This book is so good. And I am honestly, like, pissed off that it's not talked about more. Straight up, I'll say it. I'm mad. I thought this book was so good. I read it in basically one sitting, just plowed through it. I thought I was going to like it, but it still was a surprise to me how much I liked it. Well, first of all, this book came out, I want to say in the 70s. No, this book came out in 1989. But it is set in 1960s. It says colonial Rhodesia is currently modern-day Zimbabwe, and this author is from there. The book is, like, I believe, semi-autobiographical for sure. But it is about a young girl who's from a very small little village in Zimbabwe, in colonial Rhodesia, if you will, and she sort of gets an opportunity to move out of this village and get an education. It's also really, really just about this main character's journey through sort of her she has some internalized misogyny issues. She's got some issues, just sort of racial confusion. And it deals with all of that through the lens of this sort of colonization of this area and her sort of coming to understand why she believes everything she believes and sort of trying to get over some of her confusing, conflicting thoughts about where she's from and about white people. And it's just really good. And I will never, ever be able to get across what's good about it because I couldn't have written this book because I don't have this perspective. But trust me, it's excellent. And I really, really think a lot more people should be reading this book. I'm going to emphasize by reading you a couple quotes. Quote number 1. My father's idea of what was natural had begun to irritate me a long time ago. I used to try to avoid having it explained to me by maintaining a sullen silence, which, according to my father, was also unnatural. Now that the mouth is shut, the heart is proud. He would threaten to beat me, but preferring to be lazy, never bothered to catch me when I ran. I was fortunate that my father was so obviously impossible, otherwise I would have been confused. Under the circumstances, the situation was clear. There was no way of pleasing my father, nor was there any reason to. Relieved, I set about pleasing myself, which antagonized him even further. My early childhood had been a prime time for dancing. Then I had used to amuse everybody by dropping my scholarly seriousness to twist and turn and clap, almost in time to the music. As I had grown older and the music had begun to speak to me more clearly, my movements had grown stronger, more rhythmical and luxuriant. But people had not found it amusing anymore, so that in the end I realized that there were bad implications in the way I enjoyed the rhythm. My dancing compressed itself into rigid, tentative gestures. I did not stop completely, but gatherings were much less fun after that and made me feel terribly self-conscious. I forgot to mention, it's mostly just a coming-of-age story, but in the context of all those other things I feel like I mentioned before. Just so you know. Anyways, I'm not going to read anymore because the further I get in, the more it's like spoilery. But the other thing that I also forgot to mention that is delightful about this book is the female friendships. It's really good, okay? It kind of reminds me of My Brilliant Friend, but Zimbabwe. It's that complex of a female character. But instead of the sort of the Italian political situation of the 60s, it's the Zimbabwe colonization of the 60s. I think it's handled really well and really beautifully. There is one unfortunate thing about it, and that is that it's a trilogy. It was really hard for me to get my hands on this book, and I don't know how I'm going to get my hands on the other 2 books, which sucks because I really like it. The next question is a book that made you cry. That's really fun. That's a fun one. So the first is Chain Gang All-Stars. Where to begin with this book? This is a dystopian novel where people in the prison system are given a chance to fight for their freedom in like gladiator-style televised fights. It's sad, and it's really good. It's terrible. It's terrible. You have to read it at a time where you're not already like in a really dark place, because for me, it was hard on the heart, but I thought it was really, really well done and very sort of sympathetic and compassionate in its exploration of these really terrible, dark themes. So, check it out if you dare. But this next book, I, like, capital C, cried. And that book is Fool's Errand by Robin Hobb. So this was the book right before Golden Fool in this third trilogy of the Realm of the Elderling series. Guys, I was crying within like 25 pages of starting this book, and then I didn't stop crying until the end. I cried so hard, and I can't tell you about it because it's just spoilers galore. So, but just know I cried. That book made me cry. It's really sad. It was definitely a highlight, though. I thought it's really good, but really sad. Delightful vibe shift. This is what I love about the mid-year freakout, is the vibe shifts. The next question is, what is a book that made you happy? Yay! We don't have to talk about crying anymore. The first one that made me happy, I'm going to talk about 2 books, because of course I am. The first one is Anne of Avonlea by Ellen Montgomery. This is the second book in the Anne of Green Gables series. If you've read the first book, you already know these books are so delightful. They're low stakes. Everything turns out pretty well. Everyone, the more you get to learn about everyone, the more you understand them, and you see where they're coming from, and they're wholesome as hell. And Anne is just one of the greatest characters. She means well, even if she makes mistakes all the time. It's really sweet. If you love Anne of Green Gables, you'll like Anne of Avonlea. It was excellent. I listened to the audiobook. It was like a really old audiobook, and you could hear the narrator like flipping pages, which was unique for me. But it was a really sweet thing to be listening to on my drive, and I think I will like very slowly continue the series. Like, I read the first Anne of Green Gables as a child. Like, I loved Anne of Green Gables as a kid. And then I recently read it like 4 years ago. And then it took me like 4 years to read the second. So at this rate, I'll be like 75 and I'll be finishing up the final Anne of Green Gables book, and it will have given me happiness and joy for my entire life. And the other one I'll give a shout out to that made me happy was Scattered All Over the Earth by Yoko Tawada. This is a book about sort of a near future in which Japan has sunk. It's underneath the water, which is not fun. That doesn't make me happy. That would suck, obviously. But it is about just sort of a group of people who come together in a journey to find somebody who speaks Japanese. It's like really wholesome. All of the characters are wholesome. They're very diverse. There's a lot of diversity, and they're just sort of traveling around, in this book especially, just around Europe. And they're just looking for someone who speaks Japanese, and it's really sweet. Also, like, I just love the way it looks. Like, are you kidding me? It looks amazing. I guess I'll give a little bit more. Outside of their search for someone who speaks Japanese, it's just sort of a story about friendship. It's sort of a found family tale, and it's just about language and the importance of place and the importance of friendship. So that's another one that made me happy. It's me again, coming to you from the future. I finished filming this, and then I realized while watching somebody else's mid-year freakout tag, I I was missing some of the questions. I got them from online. I guess whatever one I took the questions down from didn't have all the questions. So really quickly, I'm going to run through them. The first one is new favorite author. I think I want to give a really big shout out to The Corner That Held Them by Sylvia Townsend Warner. I listened to this on audiobook and I adored it, and I will absolutely be checking out more of the stuff by Sylvia Townsend Warner because it sounds like she has a lot more sort of whimsical, magical stories that she's written, which I'm really interested in because this was not whimsical and magical at all. The Corner That Held Them is about a convent in England in like the 1300s. It's around the Black Death time, and it's just sort of about the nuns that live there and about their lives. And I could see most people thinking it's incredibly dull. It's funny that I would say I loved The Corner That Held Them, but that Moby Dick is boring, because I'm sure most people would argue the opposite. And I don't care. I loved it. I thought it was amazing, and I cannot wait to check out more by Sylvia Townsend Warner. The next question is a new favorite character. A new character. Surprisingly, the one that's standing out to me is Lu Fang from River East, River West. This is kind of a surprise to me that I went back and looked through everything and was thinking about the characters from each book that I read this year. And the one that stands out the most to me, besides The Fool, is Lu Fang from River East, River West, which I also listened to on audiobook, so I don't have it. So this story follows the perspective of a young girl whose mother is American, but she was raised in China. And I think it's like 2008, her timeline. She's like a teenager in 2008, and she's in China. It follows her perspective, and then her brand new stepfather, who is Lu Fang, who's a Chinese man. And it flashes back to his life, basically from being a teenager until the moment that he marries. I cannot think of the main girl's name. Marries her mom. So I don't know. I've never read a book that follows like stepdaughter, stepfather perspectives. I thought it was really interesting, the like interplay between their perspectives, and going back and hearing about his life, and then the way that she thinks about him. It was heartbreaking. It broke my heart a little bit to read, and I thought it was very interesting and very well done. I thought he was a really good character. He's very sad, though. He makes you sad. I'm very surprised that would be my favorite character, but yeah, he's the one that has stood out to me by far the most, I think. And then a second shout out to Queequeg from Moby Dick. He would definitely be number one if he was on page more than 3 times after the first 150 pages of Moby Dick. He would easily be an all-time favorite character. But he just sort of disappears for a lot of Moby Dick, unfortunately. And the final question is the most beautiful book you've bought so far this year, which I buy a lot of used books, so, they're often not beautiful per se. But what I do want to give a shout out to is, this is literally just the most recent book that I've acquired, so maybe this is a recency bias thing, I don't know. But Notes of a Crocodile. This book, I don't know, there is something really delightful about the way this book looks to me. It's in NYRB, they just had a sale, so I love the NYRB books. I love them so much, and this is probably my favorite that I own now, because it looks so good. Beautiful, I don't know, but I really like it. I think that's all. Those were the questions that I missed. I just wanted to pop in here and give them really quickly, because I don't want you to be sitting there going, oh my gosh, I need to know about Avery's favorite character. Now you know. Lu Fang, of all people. Who would have thought? Okay, back to current day me for the rest of the questions. Okay, yay, we're getting there. This is the last question, and it is, what books do you want to read by the end of the year? I have a lot, but I've picked 3 main ones. I've got Severance by Ling Ma. I just bought this like 2 weeks ago, so of course it went naturally to the very top of my priority list, above all those books that I haven't read. So if you don't know, Severance, this is technically completely unrelated to the Apple TV show Severance. Even though they seem spiritually like cousins. It's a dystopian like workplace drama. But I have read the first couple pages and I'm really excited. There's a really good quote on the back about the millennial condition, the alienation and cruelty that comes with being a functional person under advanced global capitalism, and the compromised pleasures and irreducibly personal meaning to be found in claiming some stability in a terrible world. It sounds right up my alley. And from what I read at the very beginning, it will be. I'm very excited to check this out. And then these other two are books I've had for a little longer, and I keep putting them off because I'm intimidated. The first is The Waves by Virginia Woolf. I'm so intimidated by this book. Last year I read Orlando and To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, and I loved them, especially Orlando. It was my favorite book of the year, or maybe tied for favorite book of the year, but I adored Orlando. And from what I've read about this book, it sounds like I'm gonna love it also. But Virginia Woolf, she can be, it's just something you need to like really be a little more concentrated on than some of these other books. So that's why I keep putting it off. It's just like the toll of having to think. But I know I'm gonna love it. And then the last one, and this is sort of similar, is Near to the Wild Heart by Clarice Lispector. This I have read maybe a quarter of it in the past. I got it from my library previously, so I don't know how much I read. And I was like, I can tell that this book is brilliant, but mentally I am not ready to engage with it properly. That was a few years ago, so I'm hoping, I believe I am now ready, but I'm still scared because I know I think about just sort of a little bit of the confusion I felt when I first read it, and so I'm a little worried, but I'm really excited. Clarice Lispector is an icon. She's an icon. She's a Brazilian author. If you got to look up, I'll just put a picture of her on screen. Doesn't she look like the coolest person ever? She's a diva. And I love her. And that's why I need to actually finish this book, and then I can read all of her other books, because I just know I'm going to love her. There's like a ton of other books that I could also mention that I want to read by the end of the year, but let's keep it there. Here's me with the pile of books. It's been a great year of reading, and I hope to keep the good times rolling, and I think I forgot to freak out, but I did my best, so don't be mad at me. And let's keep reading.